The 3-tier wedding cake cost $8,000. I know the exact price because my face was shoved into it while 300 guests watched in horror. The buttercream frosting went up my nose as my new daughter-in-law, Serafina, held my head down, her manicured nails digging into my scalp. Taste the meal you never made for your son. You pathetic excuse for a mother. She hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. The photographer's camera clicked frantically, capturing every second of my humiliation. That's when someone from the back of the ballroom gasped and shouted something that changed everything. "Oh my God, that's Cordelia Blackwood. She owns half of Silicon Valley." The look on Serafina's face transformed from triumph to terror in less than a heartbeat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I ended up with vanilla frosting in my hair and a daughter-in-law heading to federal prison. By the way, I'm curious where you're watching this from right now. Drop your city in the comments below, because this story has traveled to places I never imagined. And I love seeing how far these tales of family drama can reach. Trust me, if you've ever dealt with someone who underestimated you, you'll want to hear what happened next. The wedding had started beautifully 4 hours earlier. My son Jasper stood at the altar in his navy blue suit, the one I'd secretly paid for, but let him believe he'd bought himself. He looked handsome and happy, his eyes bright with anticipation as the string quartet began playing. Serafina floated down the aisle in a dress that cost more than most people's cars, though when I'd asked about it months ago, she'd claimed it was a bargain from a sample sale. I should have known then that something wasn't right. But I was too focused on not crying, too desperate to believe that maybe this marriage would finally bridge the gap between my son and me. You see, Jasper and I had been distant for years. After his father died when he was 12, I threw myself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. While other mothers attended school plays and soccer games, I was coding through the night, building software, creating apps, establishing the foundation of what would become Nexus Technologies. Jasper grew up thinking we were poor, that I was just another struggling single mom working multiple jobs to keep the lights on. The truth was far more complicated. But how do you explain to a teenager that you're building an empire in secret? That every missed dinner and forgotten birthday was an investment in his future? Serafina had appeared in his life 18 months ago, like she'd been crafted specifically for him. They met at a coffee shop near his office when she accidentally spilled her latte on his laptop. She was charming, sophisticated, claimed to be a life coach with clients across Europe. During our first dinner together, she'd asked all the right questions about our family history, seeming genuinely interested in understanding the dynamics between Jasper and me. "You must have worked so hard after your husband passed," she'd said, touching my hand across the table. "Jasper told me you sometimes had 3 jobs at once, that kind of sacrifice. It's admirable." The compliment felt genuine at the time, though looking back, I realized she was fishing for information about our financial situation. The wedding reception was held at the Fairmont Hotel's Grand Ballroom, a space dripping with crystal chandeliers and old money elegance. I'd offered to help pay for the venue, suggesting it casually one afternoon. But Serafina had laughed it off. "Don't be silly, Mom," she'd said, using that word like a weapon wrapped in silk. "We've got it covered. My family has connections." Her family, as it turned out, consisted of a mother in Ohio who worked at a grocery store and a father who'd been unemployed for 3 years. But I wouldn't learn that until much later, after everything had already gone to hell. At the reception, I found myself seated at table 15, tucked away in a corner so far from the main table that I needed binoculars to see my son's face clearly. The other guests at my table were distant cousins and +1s who spent most of dinner checking their phones. Meanwhile, Serafina's supposed relatives occupied the tables closest to the dance floor, laughing loudly and toasting with champagne that sparkled like liquid gold in the light. During the cocktail hour, I'd overheard one of them on a phone call speaking in what sounded like Russian, though when I'd asked about it, Serafina had quickly interjected that it was actually Swedish, her grandmother's native language. The speeches began after the main course. Serafina's maid of honor, a woman named Delilah who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, spoke eloquently about friendship and destiny. Jasper's best man told funny stories about their college days, carefully avoiding any mention of family or childhood. Then Serafina stood up, raising her champagne glass with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," she began, her voice carrying across the room with practiced ease. "Especially my new mother-in-law, Cordelia, who has shown me what it truly means to be dedicated to one's career." The pause that followed was deliberate, weighted with implication. "Jasper has told me so many stories about growing up, about learning independence at such a young age, about understanding that sometimes love means absence." The words stung exactly as she'd intended them to. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, sensing drama brewing beneath the veneer of wedding pleasantries. I kept my expression neutral, years of boardroom negotiations having taught me never to show weakness when under attack. But inside, each word landed like a carefully aimed arrow, finding every soft spot in my armor. "You know," Serafina continued, now walking toward my table with deliberate steps. "When I first met Jasper, he couldn't even remember the last birthday cake his mother had made him. Isn't that something? But tonight, we're going to change that. Tonight, we're going to create new memories. Better memories." She gestured to the servers, who began wheeling out the massive wedding cake. It was a masterpiece of culinary architecture, each tier decorated with hand-piped roses and edible gold leaf, crowned with sugar-sculptured doves that seemed ready to take flight. "Cordelia!" she called out, her voice sweet as arsenic-laced honey. "Would you join us for the cake cutting? After all, this is a family moment." The request sounded innocent enough, but something in her tone made my skin prickle with warning. Still, 300 pairs of eyes were watching, waiting, and refusing would have made me look petty and difficult. So I stood, smoothing down my modest navy dress, and walked toward the cake table where my son waited with an uncomfortable smile. The photographer positioned us carefully. Serafina on one side of Jasper, me on the other, the cake towering between us like a sugary monument to matrimonial excess. "Everyone ready?" the photographer asked, raising his camera. That's when Serafina struck. Her movement was so fast, so unexpected, that no one had time to react. One moment, I was smiling for the camera. The next, her hand was on the back of my head, forcing it forward with surprising strength. My face crashed into the middle tier of the cake with enough force to collapse the entire structure. Frosting filled my mouth and nose while cake crumbled around my ears. The shock of it, the sheer physical violation, left me gasping for air as she held me there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. "Taste the meal you never made for your son," she snarled, loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "Taste what a real mother would have provided. You pathetic excuse for a parent. You selfish, negligent woman who chose money over her own child." When she finally released me, I stumbled backward, chunks of cake falling from my hair onto the pristine marble floor. The room had gone completely silent except for the sound of phones capturing video. The digital documentation of my humiliation spreading across social media before I could even wipe the frosting from my eyes. Jasper stood frozen, his mouth open in shock, his new bride's hand still covered in buttercream from where she'd grabbed my head. That's when Dmitry Volkov, a venture capitalist I'd secretly funded years ago, stood up from table 3, His face had gone pale with recognition and something else. Maybe fear or respect or a combination of both. "That's Cordelia Blackwood," he announced, his Russian accent thickening with emotion. "She owns Nexus Technologies. She's worth $4.7 billion. I've been trying to get a meeting with her for 5 years." The silence that followed his announcement was different from the shocked quiet after the cake incident. This was the sound of 300 people simultaneously reevaluating everything they thought they knew. Phones that had been recording my humiliation suddenly shifted focus. Fingers flying across screens as guests Googled my name. Serafina's perfectly composed expression cracked like an egg, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice carried in the silent room. "She lives in a studio apartment. She drives a 10-year-old Honda. Her voice trailed off as more phones lit up with search results, with Forbes articles and tech industry profiles, with proof that the woman she'd just assaulted was indeed one of the wealthiest people in Silicon Valley. Jasper's face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical under different circumstances. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then anger, then a hurt so deep it made my chest ache even through the mask of frosting still covering my features. "Mom," he said, the word barely a whisper. "Is it true? Are you really?" Before I could answer, before I could explain decades of careful deception designed to protect him, Serafina grabbed his arm. "She's been lying to you," she said quickly, desperately. "Your entire life. She's been lying. What kind of mother does that? What kind of person pretends to be poor while sitting on billions?" It was a clever deflection, turning her assault into my betrayal. And I could see some guests nodding along with her logic. If you're still watching this, hit that subscribe button because what happened next is where things get really interesting. You see? I'd suspected something was off about Serafina from the moment she'd entered our lives, but I'd hoped I was wrong, hoped my paranoia was just a mother's overprotectiveness. Now, standing there covered in wedding cake while my son looked at me like I was a stranger, I realized my instincts had been right all along. "I need to leave," I said quietly, dignity somehow remaining despite the frosting dripping down my dress. "Jasper, when you're ready to talk, you know where to find me." I walked out of that ballroom with my head high, leaving a trail of vanilla cake crumbs behind me like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. But this was no fairy tale, and the real story was just beginning. The drive home was surreal. My ancient Honda Civic, the car Serafina had mocked so many times, felt like a sanctuary as I navigated the dark streets of San Francisco. Frosting had hardened in my hair, making it stick up at odd angles, and I caught glimpses of myself in the rearview mirror, looking like someone who'd lost a fight with a bakery. My phone vibrated constantly with calls and texts, but I ignored them all. There would be time for damage control later. Right now, I needed to think. Back in my studio apartment, the one I'd deliberately kept despite owning several buildings in the city, I stood in the shower for 40 minutes, watching pink and white frosting swirl down the drain. The apartment was modest but comfortable, filled with photos of Jasper at various ages, each one a reminder of moments I'd missed while building my empire. There was his kindergarten graduation, attended by a babysitter, his high school science fair, where he'd won second place with no parent there to celebrate, his college acceptance letter, which he'd opened alone because I was in Tokyo closing a deal. Each photo told the same story Serafina had weaponized tonight. But what she didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that every absence had been calculated, every sacrifice deliberate. The world I operated in was ruthless, filled with people who would use any weakness, any vulnerability, against you. A child would have been the ultimate weakness. a pressure point competitors and enemies could exploit. So I'd hidden him, hidden us, created a fiction of poverty that kept him safe from kidnapping attempts, from gold diggers, from the 1,000 different ways wealth destroys children. The knock on my door came at exactly midnight. I knew who it would be before I opened it. Dmitry Volkov stood in my hallway, his expensive suit slightly rumpled, his expression carefully neutral. "Cordelia," he said, using my first name for the first time in our 5-year acquaintance. "We need to talk about what happened tonight." I let him in, noting how his eyes swept the apartment, taking in the modest furniture and the high-end security system that most people wouldn't notice. Dmitry was one of the few people who knew exactly who I was, though we'd maintained the pretense of me being just another angel investor whenever we met publicly. "Quite a performance tonight," he said, settling into my worn leather armchair. "Though I'm not sure who gave the better show, you or the new Mrs. Blackwood." "What do you know about her?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. Dmitry's networks extended far beyond Silicon Valley, into the kind of gray areas where information was currency and secrets were weapons. "More than you might expect," he replied, pulling out his phone. "After tonight's display, I made some calls. Serafina Voltaire isn't her real name. It's Sarah Peterson from Columbus, Ohio. She's been married 3 times before, each time to men significantly older and wealthier than herself. The marriages tend to last between 6 and 18 months, ending when the husbands discover certain financial irregularities." My blood chilled as he continued. "She's never been prosecuted because the amounts involved were always just below the threshold for federal investigation, and the men were usually too embarrassed to pursue civil action. Your son would have been her biggest score yet, especially once she learned about your wealth." "How long has she known?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "My sources suggest she's known from the beginning. She targeted Jasper specifically because of his connection to you, though she probably didn't know the full extent of your wealth until tonight. The coffee shop meeting wasn't accidental. She'd been following him for weeks, learning his routines, preparing for that perfectly orchestrated encounter." The revelation should have shocked me, but instead, it felt like confirmation of what my instincts had been screaming all along. "I need everything you can find on her," I said. "Every detail, every connection, every crime she's ever contemplated, and I need it fast, before she does something irreversible." Dmitry stood to leave, then paused at the door. "You know, Cordelia, most people would have crumbled after what happened tonight. The humiliation alone would have destroyed them. But you walked out of that ballroom like a queen. It reminded me why I've always been slightly terrified of you." After he left, I sat in the darkness of my apartment, planning my next move. Serafina had made a critical error tonight. She'd assumed that because I lived modestly and avoided the spotlight, I was weak. She'd mistaken restraint for inability, confused choosing not to use power with not having it. It was a mistake many had made before her, and like them, she was about to learn exactly why I'd survived and thrived in one of the most cutthroat industries in the world. My phone rang at 3 in the morning. Jasper's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered not answering, but maternal instinct won out, as it always did when it came to my son. "Mom." His voice was rough, like he'd been crying or drinking or both. "I'm at the police station. Serafina, something's happened. They're saying she's been arrested. But that can't be right. Mom, I need you." The irony wasn't lost on me. Hours after publicly humiliating me, after his wife had literally shoved my face into a cake, he was calling me for help. But that's what mothers do, isn't it? We show up even when it hurts, even when we have every reason to stay away. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already reaching for my coat. The police station at 3:30 in the morning was a fluorescent-lit purgatory of exhausted officers and people making bad decisions. I found Jasper in the waiting area, still wearing his wedding suit, though the tie was gone and his shirt was untucked. He looked up when I entered, and the relief on his face was quickly replaced by shame. "I didn't know who else to call," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "What happened?" I asked, sitting down beside him on the uncomfortable plastic chairs. "After you left, things got weird. Serafina started drinking heavily, kept making calls to someone she said was her lawyer. Then the police showed up with a warrant. They said something about fraud, about previous marriages, about—" He trailed off, running his hands through his hair. "Mom, they said she's been married 4 times before? They said she's wanted for questioning in 3 states." Part 2. The fluorescent lights made Jasper look even paler as he continued his story. The detective said someone tipped them off about her using multiple identities. They found 3 different passports in her luggage when they searched our honeymoon suite. Mom, one of them had a completely different name with her photo. How is that even possible? I knew exactly how it was possible, having received Dimitri's preliminary report just an hour earlier, but this wasn't the time to reveal my hand. "What name was on the other passports?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Sarah Peterson, Marina Volkov, and Elizabeth Hartley. The detective said she's been running marriage scams across the country for almost a decade. They think she might have stolen over $2 million from her previous victims." His voice cracked on the word victims, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. A detective approached us, a tired-looking woman in her 40s with keen eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Detective Rivera. We've been trying to reach you. It seems you were the intended target of Mrs. Peterson's scheme. Not your son. We have evidence suggesting she knew about your wealth before she ever approached him." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, maintaining the facade of surprise. "Email correspondence with someone named Harrison, a psychiatrist who specializes in competency evaluations. The emails date back 2 months before she met your son. They discuss strategies for having elderly relatives declared mentally incompetent." Rivera watched my reaction carefully. "Were you aware of any attempts to question your mental capacity?" Jasper's head snapped up. "She mentioned something about that last week. Said she was worried about you living alone, that maybe you needed help managing things. I thought she was just being caring." The detective pulled out a tablet, showing us a photograph from Serafina's phone. It was a picture of me taken from across the street, at least 6 months old based on the construction visible in the background. There were dozens more. A digital stalking portfolio that mapped my routines, my contacts, my entire life. "She's been planning this for quite some time," Rivera said. "Your son was simply the pathway to get to you." The pain that flashed across Jasper's face was almost unbearable to witness. In one night, he'd lost his wife, his understanding of his mother, and his sense of his own judgment. "I need some air," he said abruptly, stumbling toward the exit. I found him outside, sitting on the station steps with his head in his hands. The pre-dawn air was cold and damp. Typical San Francisco weather that cut through clothing and settled in your bones. "I'm such an idiot," he said without looking up. "She played me perfectly. Every conversation, every moment. It was all calculated." "You're not an idiot," I said, sitting down beside him despite the cold concrete. "You're someone who wanted to believe in love. That's not stupidity, it's humanity." "Is it, though, because a smart person would have seen the signs? A smart person would have questioned why someone like her was interested in someone like me?" He finally looked at me, and the self-loathing in his eyes was devastating. "I'm a mid-level software engineer who lives in a 1-bedroom apartment and drives a used Prius. She looked like a supermodel and claimed to have clients all over Europe. How did I not see it? Because con artists are experts at telling us exactly what we want to hear, I said carefully. She didn't just study me, Jasper. She studied you. She knew you felt abandoned, knew you craved someone who would make you feel valued and important. She became exactly what you needed her to be. Like you became exactly what you needed to be. The accusation in his voice was sharp, but not entirely unfair. All these years, Mom, living like we were poor, letting me believe we were struggling. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I took jobs I hated to help with bills you didn't need help with. I skipped my senior trip because I thought we couldn't afford it. I watched you work yourself to exhaustion for money you already had. The hurt poured out of him in waves. Years of resentment and confusion finally given voice. Do you know what it was like explaining to girlfriends why my mom couldn't come to dinner because she was working? Having teachers ask if everything was okay at home because you never showed up to parent conferences. I defended you to everyone, said you were doing your best. That being a single mom was hard. And the whole time, you were building a billion-dollar empire. 4.7 billion. I corrected quietly, then immediately regretted it when his face darkened. Great. Thanks for the clarification. That makes it so much better. He stood up, pacing in front of the station. Why? Mom, just tell me why. Why all the deception? This was the moment I dreaded and prepared for in equal measure. Your father didn't just die, Jasper. He was murdered. The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. He owed money to people who don't accept bankruptcy as an answer. They came looking for it after the funeral. And when they realized there was nothing to collect, they made threats, specific threats about you. Jasper stopped pacing, his face pale in the streetlight. You never told me any of this? What was I supposed to say? That Daddy's business partners might kidnap you if they knew we had money, that every playdate needed background checks. Every friend could be a potential threat. I stood up, facing him directly. I made a choice to hide our wealth, to live modestly, to be invisible. It wasn't perfect, but it kept you safe. Safe from what? From having a normal childhood, from having a mother who was present. His anger was building again. But underneath it was something else, the beginning of understanding. From ending up like the Whitmore heir, kidnapped at 14 and held for ransom. From becoming like the Patterson kids, so damaged by wealth and privilege, they're all in rehab or prison. From attracting people like Serafina before you were old enough to see them coming. I pulled out my phone, showing him a file Dimitri had sent. This is a list of every attempted kidnapping, extortion, and fraud targeting tech billionaires' children in the last 20 years. There are over 200 incidents. Jasper, 200 times someone's child was hurt because of money. He stared at the list, scrolling through name after name, some of which he recognized from news stories. But you could have told me when I was older, when I could understand. When would that have been? 1821-30. There's no magic age when someone becomes immune to the corruption of wealth. Look at what happened tonight. You're 35 years old, and Serafina still managed to manipulate you. Imagine if you'd known about the money from the beginning. How many Serafinas would have targeted you in high school, in college, in your 20s? The fight seemed to drain out of him as the logic sank in. So you sacrificed our relationship to protect me from hypothetical threats. I sacrificed our relationship to ensure you'd live long enough to hate me for it. I said simply, and you're here. Aren't you alive, educated, with your own career and accomplishments that no one can claim you didn't earn? That's all I wanted. A police officer came out to tell us that Serafina was being transferred to federal custody. The FBI had taken over the case due to the interstate nature of her crimes. She would likely face serious prison time, though the exact charges were still being determined. "What am I supposed to do now?" Jasper asked as we watched the sun begin to rise over the city. "I'm married to a criminal. Everyone at the wedding saw what happened. It's probably all over social media by now. How do I go back to work on Monday? How do I face anyone?" "You don't have to face it alone," I said. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I can help. I have lawyers who can get the marriage annulled based on fraud, PR people who can manage the media situation, security to ensure Serafina's associates don't cause problems." "Serafina's associates?" His eyes widened. "There are more of them." She wasn't working alone. Someone provided those fake passports. Someone taught her how to target victims. Someone was going to help liquidate the assets once she got control. I paused, debating how much to reveal. Dimitri is tracking down her network. We'll know more in a few days. Dmitry Volkov, the venture capitalist. Jasper looked confused. "How do you know him?" "I funded his first company 15 years ago when no one else would touch him. He was a Russian immigrant with a thick accent and big dreams. Now he runs one of the most successful VC firms in the valley." I smiled slightly. He's also very good at finding information when needed. We went back inside where Detective Rivera was waiting with paperwork. Serafina had apparently broken down during questioning, admitting to some of her crimes while trying to paint herself as a victim of circumstances. She claimed childhood poverty had driven her to desperate measures, that she never meant to hurt anyone, just wanted financial security. "It's a common story," Rivera said. "They always have a sob story ready, but the evidence is clear. She's been doing this systematically, methodically, with full knowledge of the harm she was causing." As we left the station, Jasper asked to come back to my apartment. The honeymoon suite held too many memories, and he couldn't face returning there yet. We drove in silence through empty streets, the city slowly waking around us, in my apartment. I made coffee while he sat at my small kitchen table, looking lost. "This place really is tiny," he said, taking in the modest space. "Why here when you could live anywhere?" "Because it's real," I answered, handing him a mug. "Everything in here I chose because I liked it, not because it would impress someone or convey status. That worn couch is comfortable. These photos make me happy. This apartment is who I am when no one's watching." He picked up a photo from the coffee table, one of him at age 7 wearing a superhero cape made from a dishcloth. "I remember this day. You'd just gotten home from a double shift, but you still played superheroes with me for hours." "I was exhausted," I admitted. "But you were so excited about that cape. You'd been wearing it all day, waiting for me to come home and see it." "I thought we were playing because you loved spending time with me. Was it guilt?" The question wasn't accusatory, just sad. "It was love," I said firmly. "Everything was love, even the parts that hurt, especially the parts that hurt." Over the next several hours, I told him everything about the late-night coding sessions that built our first profitable app, about the hostile takeover attempts I'd fought off while he was at summer camp, about the times I'd stood outside his school, watching from a distance to make sure he was safe, about the trust fund waiting for him, designed to provide security without destroying ambition. $500 million. He nearly choked on his coffee. "You set aside $500 million for me. In a trust that releases in stages, starting when you turn 40. Enough to ensure you never have to worry. Not enough to ruin you. The rest goes to various charities and research foundations." I refilled his mug. "I've seen what inheriting billions does to people, Jasper. It rarely ends well. And if something had happened to you before I turned 40, Then a board of trustees would have managed it, with strict instructions to maintain your current lifestyle plus inflation adjustments. You would have been comfortable but not wealthy, safe but not spoiled. He shook his head in amazement. You really thought of everything. Not everything, I admitted. I didn't anticipate Serafina. I was so focused on protecting you from obvious threats that I missed the subtle one. She was smart, using emotional manipulation instead of direct targeting. I should have investigated her sooner. When did you first suspect her? The third time we had dinner together. She asked about your father's death, but her questions were too specific, too focused on the financial aftermath. Most people ask about emotions, memories. She asked about insurance policies and estate settlements. Why didn't you say something then? Because you were happy. Because I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Because I'd already taken so much from your life. I couldn't bear to take her too unless I was certain. I met his eyes. I had Dimitri start investigating her a month ago. The wedding invitation arrived the next day, and I decided to wait until after to act. I thought I could protect you better as her mother-in-law than as your estranged mother. Instead, she publicly humiliated you. His jaw clenched at the memory. The cake, the speech, all of it was planned. Wasn't it? Probably. She needed to establish a narrative where I was the villain, where any action I took against her would look like revenge for the humiliation. It's actually quite clever. If I'd moved against her after tonight, everyone would have assumed it was about the cake, not about protecting you. Jasper was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. What happens now to her? I mean, federal prison, most likely. The FBI has been building a case against her network for years. She just gave them the break they needed. As for the marriage, my lawyers will file for annulment first thing Monday morning. Fraud vitiates everything, legally speaking. It will be like the marriage never happened. But it did happen, he said quietly. I stood at that altar and promised to love her forever. I meant those words, even if she didn't. Your feelings were real, even if she wasn't. Grieving that is normal, necessary even. I reached across the table, hesitating before touching his hand. You're not the first person to be fooled by someone like her, and you won't be the last. The only difference is you have resources to fight back. Your resources, he corrected. No, your resources. The trust fund can be accessed early under specific circumstances. Protecting yourself from a predatory spouse qualifies. You'll have the best lawyers money can buy. He turned his hand over, squeezing mine. It was the first time we'd really touched in years, beyond perfunctory holiday hugs. I'm still angry, he said, about the lies, the missed birthdays, all of it. That doesn't just go away because I understand your reasons. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to do better. How do I know you won't just disappear into work again? How do I know this isn't just another strategic move in whatever game you're playing? You don't, I admitted. But I'm 73 years old, Jasper. I've built my empire, secured your future, and discovered that none of it means anything if I don't have a relationship with my son. If that's not enough reason to change, nothing ever will be. He stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. She's probably telling the FBI I'm complicit right now, that I knew about your money, that we planned this together. She can say whatever she wants. The evidence speaks for itself. Your genuine shock at the wedding was captured on dozens of phones. Your financial records show no unusual activity. You're a victim here, not a perpetrator. I don't feel like a victim. I feel like an idiot who needs his mother to clean up his mess. The self-recrimination in his voice was painful to hear. You feel like a human being who got conned by a professional, There's no shame in that. I joined him at the window. Do you know how many supposedly brilliant tech executives have fallen for similar schemes? The only difference is their stories don't usually involve wedding cake assault. That got a small laugh from him. The first genuine moment of levity since everything had fallen apart. The cake was good, at least, before it ended up on your face. $8,000 should buy a decent cake, I said dryly. 8,000? She told me it was 3. Add it to the list of lies, I said. Though honestly, of all her deceptions, that one bothers me the least. We spent the rest of the morning talking, really talking, for the first time in decades, about his work, his dreams, his fears about the future, about my company, the problems I solved, the challenges still ahead, about his father, the man he'd been before desperation drove him to dangerous choices, about the life we could have had versus the one we'd actually lived. By noon, Dmitri had sent a comprehensive report on Serafina's network. It was more extensive than we'd imagined, connecting to organized crime in 3 countries. She wasn't just a con artist. She was part of a sophisticated operation that targeted wealthy families across the globe. The FBI was apparently thrilled to have her in custody, seeing her as the key to dismantling the entire network. This is bigger than just us, Jasper said, reading through the report. She's hurt dozens of families. And now she'll face justice for all of it, I said. Your situation might have been the catalyst, but the investigation will help many people. That afternoon, we met with my legal team. They'd already begun filing the necessary paperwork for annulment and were coordinating with the FBI to ensure Jasper was protected from any retaliation. The head lawyer, a woman named Catherine who'd been with me for 15 years, was brutally efficient in her assessment. The marriage is void due to fraud. We'll have it legally erased within 2 weeks. The prenuptial agreement she signed, thinking you had no assets, actually works in our favor now. She can't claim any community property because she explicitly waived those rights. Catherine smiled coldly. She outsmarted herself. As the lawyers talked strategy, I watched my son absorb the reality of his situation. He was learning what it meant to have real power, to have resources that could solve problems, to be someone others worked to protect. It was a heavy lesson, one I'd hoped to delay even longer. That evening, we ordered takeout from his favorite Chinese restaurant, eating it straight from the containers like we used to when he was young. Remember when this was our Sunday tradition? He asked, expertly wielding his chopsticks. Before things got complicated, every Sunday for 3 years, I confirmed. Until you decided you were too old to have dinner with your mother. I was 13. Everything was embarrassing at 13. He paused, then added, I missed it though. The routine. The reliability of knowing Sunday meant Chinese food with Mom. We could start again, I suggested carefully. Different circumstances, but same tradition. Maybe, he said, and for the first time. It sounded like he meant it. As the sun set over San Francisco, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. We sat in comfortable silence. The day had been a destruction and reconstruction, tearing down lies and building something new in their place. It wasn't perfect. Might never be perfect. But it was real. You know what the strangest part is? Jasper said suddenly. I'm almost grateful to Serafina. Without her, we might have gone our entire lives without having this conversation. Without her showing me who you really are. I could have done without the cake facial, I said, touching my still tender nose. Fair point. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Though you have to admit, it makes for one hell of a story. That it does, I agreed. Though next time someone wants to make a dramatic statement at a wedding, I hope they choose something less dairy-based. We laughed together, and in that moment, despite everything we'd lost and found in the last 24 hours, I knew we'd be okay. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. The empire I'd built had been meant to protect him, but in the end, it was the truth that set us both free. 3 months later, Serafina was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. She stood in the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, her perfectly styled hair now pulled back in a simple ponytail, as the judge read out the charges: wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The list went on. Her network had been dismantled, with 17 arrests across 4 states. She never looked at us once during the proceedings. Jasper had moved into one of my properties, a modest 2-bedroom condo with a view of the bay. We met for Chinese food every Sunday without fail, slowly rebuilding what had been broken. He'd started seeing a therapist to work through the betrayal, and sometimes I joined him for sessions, both of us learning to navigate our complicated history. "I've been thinking," he said one Sunday, expertly picking up a dumpling with his chopsticks. "Maybe I should learn the business, not for the money, but to understand what you built, why you built it." "I'd like that," I said, trying not to show how much his words meant to me. The wedding cake incident had become something of a legend in Silicon Valley, though most people were too polite to mention it to my face. But sometimes, when I walked into meetings, I'd catch a glimmer of new respect in people's eyes. I'd been publicly humiliated and had walked away with dignity intact. In our world, that was power of a different kind.